Today's customers expect fast, personalized support. Intercom has the tools you need to deliver just that, efficiently, at any scale. Supercharge your team's productivity and make your customers super happy with Intercom. Learn more at intercom.com/support.
The level of connection you feel in your home dramatically influences your experiences there. Get the tools to control that connection in your communities with the first multifamily platform that unifies management and resident experiences to create smart apartments. Talk to a RealPage consultant today to see how your properties can meet the future of multifamily with the Smart Building Suite.
Get informed, get inspired, and get connected. CannabisRadio.com presents NCIA's Cannabis Industry Voice. The National Cannabis Industry Association is the only national trade organization representing the businesses of the legal cannabis industry. NCIA's Cannabis Industry Voice covers a range of topics, including the rapidly evolving political and policy changes that affect our industry, news and events of importance to cannabis professionals, and features on companies, individuals, and campaigns at the cutting edge of the cannabis industry. NCIA's Cannabis Industry Voice begins now.
Hello, thanks for tuning in to another episode of NCIA's Cannabis Industry Voice on Cannabis Radio. I'm your host, Bethany Moore, and I'm the Deputy Director of Communications at the National Cannabis Industry Association. Today, my guest is Jim Mocoso. He's the CEO of Flow Technology and Director of Lucid Lab Group. Jim holds board seats in several organizations and serves as Vice Chair of the Scientific Advisory Committee here at NCIA. In Washington State, Jim's an active member of the Technical Assistance and Mentorship Work Group in the Social Equity in Cannabis Task Force, which is a working group formed under the Governor's Interagency Council on Health Disparities. Before the cannabis industry, Jim cut his teeth on Wall Street as a finance professional, and he's recognized by industry peers as having expertise in processing and extraction technologies. And he regularly contributes to printed publications, in addition to speaking at some of the largest industry events around the country, like NCIA's trade shows. Welcome so much for being on the show today, Jim.
Thank you so much, Bethany. It's great to be here. It's great to be speaking with you. Obviously, I've known you for several years. I think it's like 5 or 6 years now I've known you, Bethany.
Years, yes. We met at one of those awesome Cannabis Caucus events that NCIA used to host around the country, those lovely little evening networking events that I hope we can get back to doing, maybe in 2022. We'll see how things go. So let's kick off the conversation by getting to know you a little bit better, some more about your background and experience before moving into the cannabis space.
Sure. I'm from New York originally. I grew up in New York, the craziness that is New York, specifically on Long Island before moving into the city. And, I came out here into the cannabis industry on the West Coast back in 2014 as an investor. As you mentioned, I come from the finance world. I was a financial advisor in investment banking for about 7 years before getting out of that industry and kind of getting back into something I've always loved, which is entrepreneurship. And so, cannabis has always been a big part of my life ever since I was 18. In high school, I was a bit of an athlete, and I used to make fun of the kids that were, would get stoned, and I would kind of, look at them kind of funny and make fun of them for their dopiness. And then I had a friend, obviously a good friend, that told me that given my personality, I'm a little bit high strung and a little assertive, I would say. They introduced me to cannabis after my football season and changed my life, changed my perspective on the world, definitely mellowed me out. And, ever since then, I've been a big proponent of cannabis and about 8 years ago got involved professionally in the industry here on the West Coast.
Yes. Well, I can relate to really getting into cannabis after high school myself. Really didn't get into it for some reason until college. when I really found it as a helpful substance to get me through some anxiety and depression for sure. So not everyone's been, smoking since high school, but pretty soon after for sure. All right. So when you decided to leave Wall Street and you had your passion for cannabis, how did the launching of these companies happen? I think you said you started by investing in some cannabis companies. What happened from there?
Yeah, well, when I first met you, I was still both involved with a company called Vuber Technologies and had just recently launched Lucid Lab Group, which is how most people know me in this industry. And what happened was I had a friend from high school who was actually a writer for a magazine out here on the West Coast called the Northwest Leaf, and he had one of the coolest jobs in the world. He got to sample cannabis products and then write about them in this magazine. And I thought
Man,
that was the coolest thing in the world. Yeah,
dream
right.
job.
And he was involved as a founder in this vaporizer company. And so he called me up. He told me kind of what they were doing, and invited me to come out and check out what was happening here on the West Coast. And once I saw that vape cartridge, with cannabis in it, remember e-cigs were all the rage kind of at that time in 2013, mid to late 2013, when I'd come and saw what they were working on, as like kind of a business person, the wheels started turning, and I saw the opportunity. And they asked me if I would consider investing, and I said sure. Coming from the finance world, I was like, straightforward. Send me your executive summary. Send me your business plan. Let me take a look at what you guys got going on. And they didn't have any of those things, which made me laugh. I was like, well, tough to raise any money if you can't tell people in a documented way what you're doing. And so, I did my research into the vape side of things, into the industry. I actually got so excited about it. I wrote their business plan, presented it to them, and said, hey, here's your business plan. And not only that, I'm going to invest, but I have one caveat. You got to let me join the team on your sales team and, really get involved in the market. And keep in mind at that time, this was late 2013, Washington had just passed, along with Colorado, adult use recreational cannabis in both of those states. And, timing standpoint, it was just good timing. I invested in that company, and one of the other investors there, we started Lucid Lab Group, and the rest, as they say, is history.
Absolutely. And if I recall, Washington State had some hiccups kind of rolling out those licenses. They were taking their time. They were kind of fumbling with the regulations, and it took them a hot sec to really get those licenses out. Is that an accurate memory of mine?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, just like any state. I mean, I don't think any state has had a seamless integration from not having regulated cannabis to then having a regulated cannabis program. Washington, unlike Colorado, right? Colorado, who also had a robust medical program, they voted on legalization there in Q4 of 2013, and come January, they had rolled it out. And initially they just turned over a lot of the medical stores and made this kind of new regulation.
Right.
They adopted it pretty quickly. Washington did not do that, and the issue, the issue was they wanted to create a whole new program where they didn't factor in medical cannabis retailers that were already operating and medical cultivators and processors into that program. It was a whole new process with whole new licensing, and basically in this state, which was to the detriment of the model of collective gardens and medicinal cannabis, they completely eliminated that program and made a whole new program. And certainly even up till today, the detrimental things that came out of that transition are still being fought against. And certainly that's a part of the work we're doing on the social equity and cannabis task forces. Not only to try to right some of the wrongs that happened in that transition, but also to work with the African American as well as other people of color and the communities of those people of color here in Washington to bring some equity back into as a part of the cannabis industry.
Yeah, absolutely. I definitely want to dive into some of those topics with diversity, equity, and inclusion later in the show for sure. But before we hop onto our first commercial break here. Let's bring us up to the present day here. We're wrapping up the year 2021. And you've got your hands in a couple different projects here, including Lucid Labs, which you basically helped launch and co-found. What else is going on with you these days?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Lucid Labs are still very much active, and again, that's how most people know me. But something that I'm real excited about is our most recent project, Flow Technology, and this is a company that we started actually last year. We incorporated in Q2, but really we raised the initial capital for it, both our own and a couple of initial investors at the end of 2020, and really to start this year is when we really launched the company from an operational standpoint. We moved in from our existing licensed processing facility, which was 6,000 square feet, closer to downtown Seattle. We found a bigger space here in South Park, Seattle, 15,000 square feet, where our processor is still very much active, but we've started a research space where we can really focus on, specifically with Flow Technology, the infused ingredients space. And that is, when you think about cannabis consumer packaged goods, and we're talking about food, beverages, cosmetics, supplements, and wellness products. When we think about the CPG space in cannabis, there's a huge and robust market, right? But the measurement of how well products work is kind of this on-off switch. On, does it work? Off, it doesn't work. The products of the future are going to be able to quantify how well something works. Does it work quickly? Rapid onset. Can we regulate mood states in a sense? Where we're using products for specific effects, as opposed to, did it just get me quote unquote high? And so the work that we're doing with Flow Technology is bringing a little bit more science and data into the product development space when it comes to consumer packaged goods. And that's the big push here with this new venture, Flow Technology.
That's amazing stuff. I love hearing about how we're continuing to become more sophisticated and applying more scientific methods, and eventually getting to the point where we can reverse engineer exactly what we're looking for. That's amazing. Okay, let's take our first commercial break, and then we'll come back and chat more with Jim Macoso of Lucid Lab Group. Stay tuned. We'll be right back.
NCIA's Cannabis Industry Voice will return once we give a voice to our sponsors.
Today's customers expect fast, personalized support. Intercom has the tools you need to deliver just that, efficiently, at any scale. Supercharge your team's productivity and make your customers super happy with Intercom. Learn more at intercom.com/support.
People like to have fun during the holidays. You know what's not fun? Returning an ugly sweater. Don't give anyone an ugly sweater this year. Give choice gift cards from giftcards.com instead, and they can pick their own sweater from some of their favorite brands. It's genius.
All right, we're back on NCIA's Cannabis Industry Voice on Cannabis Radio. I'm your host, Bethany Moore, with the National Cannabis Industry Association, chatting with Jim Macoso of Lucid Labs, who's very involved in NCIA. In fact, I just saw him a couple months ago in Detroit, where we hosted our Midwest Cannabis Business Conference, and specifically a social equity workshop. And you and I chatted a lot about what's happening in the industry in that space. Of course, NCIA has a DEI community as a committee, I should say, as well as a DEI scholarship program for licensees. So let's begin by talking about those state-by-state programs that are out there, separate of NCIA, but the states that are writing social equity licensing provisions into their state laws at the get-go, rather than as an afterthought. And I believe Massachusetts was one of the first states to actually do that. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, as somebody who is from the African American community, I'm mixed race. So I was actually born in the South Pacific. My mother is Tongan, which is Polynesian, and my dad is from Zaire, formerly Zaire, now the Democratic Republic of the Congo. So, I am a walking billboard for, what others are proposing as social equity. But, certainly when it comes to these programs, every single state has, or at least most of the states, when it comes to the cannabis industry, most of the states that are that have active cannabis programs, be it medical or adult use, are now obviously trying to make social equity a part of the legislative mandate of those programs. And for some, it's too little, too late. But any movement on that front, I think, is worthwhile. In Washington, we passed legislation to include a social equity component for retail licenses. And I'm very proud to be a member of the Social Equity and Cannabis Task Force here in Washington as a person who comes from the industry. And really the whole goal for us as a task force is to try to right the wrongs and some of the harms that have been caused to the communities of people of color, with both the African American communities as well as others, that have been caused by the war on drugs historically. And so there's where we're at in our process. We are trying to take what was already legislatively mandated, which was a little less than a couple $1 million dedicated to technical assistance and mentorship, a grant program for about 39 retail licenses that are being dedicated specifically to social equity applicants. And we're trying to change that to add a little bit more capital to those programs. But certainly there are plenty of programs state to state that are really trying to focus on how we get this right in the cannabis industry. And some of the questions that are coming up consistently is, what is equity, what is equitable, and what is equality? How do we define that from a financial standpoint, right? There's never going to be a number where people feel like they're getting what they deserve. But certainly, how do we approach that number with programs that are fiscally responsible, that benefit the state, stakeholders, especially benefit the community members that are participating in the cannabis industry, that are going to be recipients of, be it grants or loans or any type of support as social equity applicants. As an example, I was in New York a couple of days ago at a mixer where it was, some legislatures, some business owners, some investors, people from different parts of the industry. And one of the conversations that kept coming up is, how are they as a community going to get it right in New York? And I'm currently a resident also of New York, and for me, I take a huge interest in being a part of that conversation at the outset, because one thing I've learned here in Washington is trying to take a program that is already so robust and exists. And we're a small state, about 7 million people here in Washington, but we generate some of the largest tax revenue per capita when it comes to the cannabis industry. About $400 to $500 million a year in taxes are created. So how do we take a program that already exists, where taxes are already allocated to their multiple programs, and reappropriate some of that to the social equity program in a way that's equitable, and in a way where we're not just pulling money from programs that are used to getting that capital already. That's much harder than getting it right at the outset. And so, in New York, and some of the folks that I met out there, both on the policy side, on the industry side, and on the investment side, that are taking a keen interest to make sure they get it right from the outset in New York. But there are a number of states with social equity programs. And I think just the fact that this is topic of conversation in our industry is a good one, right? That's a great place to start, is when you're talking about it and trying to empower folks from those communities, from our communities, in ways that allow equitable participation in the industry.
Absolutely. I mean, it's an encouraging step in the right direction at the state level there, for certain. And, some other ways that I've seen that manifest is lower fees to apply for these licenses, or more access to the capital needed that's, historically more difficult for people of color to get access to. So these are all steps in the right direction. It was interesting to hear the training and mentorship programs as well. Again, all really encouraging steps in the right direction. And specifically in your home state in Washington, you're very, very involved there. Is there anything else you're seeing there at the state level in Washington to move things along?
Yeah, I mean, well, the interesting thing about our task force compared to maybe other task force in other states is, it's not just a legislative run task force. I'm not a legislator and to run for office. And I would participate just because I showed up as a community member and participated in the public meetings. And I was asked to participate because I'm part of community and I represent both the African American community, but also industry as a business owner of multiple businesses. And just being able to be a part of that program as a layperson, as somebody who doesn't understand how the legislature really works when it comes to allocating capital out of with considerations like the fiscal considerations, as well as working with the multiple groups, commerce, legal, et cetera, to push something over a finish line. For me, that was very empowering. But one of the things I think that's most interesting to me is the fact that given the amount of capital that comes out of our program here in Washington, about a third of of the price that you purchase a adult use product from a retail store, about a third of that price is just taxes. And with that in consideration, that gives us a tremendous pool of capital for which we can discuss uses for that benefit our communities, that benefit, let's say, our industry. Probably one of the things that I'm most interested in our state, and that I've got to see as being a part of this task force firsthand, is how little amount actually goes into research of cannabis, right? We want to develop policies to make sure that these products are being consumed in safe ways, and that the consumption limits that we set are such that science and research has been taken into account. Meanwhile, less than a 0.5% of all of the capital that comes out of our program here, our tax program here, goes to research. So, one of the things I'm excited about is to start developing these relationships with legislators to really talk about ways that we can dedicate more capital to research. Now, obviously, me as having a company that's using research and data to drive product development, certainly, there's a consideration there for me as a company, right? Like, we are one of the companies that would benefit from a program like that. But at the end of the day, it takes somebody to kind of be a flag bearer, understand how the legislative process works, and develop the relationships to push, let's say, a piece of legislation like that over the finish line. So that's one of the exciting side shoots that have come from me being involved in the task force. And what's more than that is, I've got a chance to see how the political process works, but not without, incurring some scars. One thing I've learned is you're not going to please everyone.
No.
But I have a VP of communications that reminds me, politics is really just a business of the people.
That's so interesting. Yeah, for sure. It's great that you literally have made a seat for yourself at the table there, and maybe you can make sure that the regulators don't pull any surprise moves on the industry again, like just deciding that edibles need to be removed from all shelves, right?
Well, I don't know how good of a job I can do on that front, but what I can say is, at the very least, I know who I need to speak to if I want to voice my opinion as a community member and as an industry member, and that's really all you can ask for.
I mean, yep, and maybe they could ask the industry what we think before making decisions too. That'd be something. All right, let's take our last commercial break and then come back and wrap up our chat with Jim Macoso of Lucid Labs and Flow Technology. Stay tuned. We'll be right back.
NCIA's Cannabis Industry Voice will return once we give a voice to our sponsors.
Only Sector Spider ETFs divide the S&P 500 into 11 investable pieces. You can now customize the S&P 500 by overweighting and underweighting sectors to meet your investment objectives. Before investing, consider the fund's objectives, risks, charges, and expenses. Visit sectorspiders.com for a prospectus containing this information. Read it carefully. Distributed by Alps Portfolio Solutions Distributor, Inc., a FINRA member.
All right, we're back on NCIA's Cannabis Industry Voice on Cannabis Radio, chatting with Jim Macoso of Lucid Labs and Flow Technology, somewhere between Washington State and New York. So back to kind of the science and research part of all this. As far as what's on the horizon for our industry, I get really excited when as I've mentioned, when I see the research that's more sophisticated and products that are really harnessing various cannabinoids. And we're really moving beyond the old CBD and THC, like salt and pepper combo here. Now I can buy gummies that are specifically designed for helping me fall asleep. And we're looking at cannabinoids like CBN and CBG. What are you seeing coming down the pipe there?
Yeah, I mean, well, I think there are some companies that are starting to market those types of products. Certainly, I would still say it's in its infancy. Ultimately, the two cannabinoids that move the needle, I would say primarily THC, and it's probably because we have numbers for that and we can track it really effectively. And then obviously CBD, which there are huge companies that sell a myriad of just CBD only products to meet federal regulation here in the US of less than 0.3% THC in their products. But certainly those, what someone called minor cannabinoids, are having a major impact in the development process of plenty of companies. And certainly one of our goals with Flow Technology is to look at cannabinoids from the standpoint of what the data tells us they can do in terms of potentiating certain effects, in terms of working for some indications of illnesses better than others, and really looking at cannabinoids outside of the recreational applications of them. What you're talking about is what a friend of mine over at a large infused ingredient manufacturer in Austin, who sat on a panel I did at Marijuana Biz, is this term mood states. By trying to create formulations of both cannabinoids and maybe some other things like terpenes and other compounds that help to design or develop products for mood state performance. That is what I think some of the best companies have been trying to do. But now I think some people are actually putting their money where their mouth is. Certainly at Flow Technology, that's our big focus, and has been, for the last 6 months to a year, and certainly is our focus for the next year, is taking the real scientific step to quantify which cannabinoids, or let's just say which groups of cannabinoids and in what ratios, can actually create that mood state, can actually be measured to cause a specific mood state that you're going after as a product developer. And there are very, very tried and true methods to do that. If we look at what people do or what companies have done in the pharmaceutical industry, when it comes to therapeutics, or in food manufacturing, or in wellness products or supplements, there are ways to go about testing these compounds for specific effects. And I think we're just at the stage in our industry where people are going to start to do that type of work. And certainly there are companies that have already done that. I can think of one example of a company in San Francisco run by a PhD scientist. He's part of the NCIA's Scientific Advisory Committee, which I chair now, Bethany. I think last I spoke, I was vice chair.
Chair now. Great.
Yeah, which is great. But this scientist, he's doing an actual clinical study on a CBD product he created for sleep, using simple tools, but doing it in the scientific way that any clinician would do it when they are running a clinical study. And that is the next phase of product development.
Okay, so I need to sign up for some focus groups, is what you're saying. Got it. Well, we have just a minute or so left on the show, but Jim, I want to thank you so much for being so involved with NCIA over the years. And my 8-year anniversary with NCIA is coming up in January 2022. And it's, that's like 80 years in dog years, but it's been amazing to be a part of all this, and to make friendships along the way, like yourself, where we now have this shared history of watching everything over these last few years. So thanks for your involvement with the committees too. You were vice chair last term, and now you're the chair. So exciting. I just really appreciate your involvement in helping bring this industry forward in so many different ways, actually.
Well, thank you much. And it's been a pleasure to be a part of this industry, but it's also been a pleasure specifically to be a part of NCIA. And now to be a part of one of the committees and, be a part of thought leadership. The fact that I chair a scientific advisory committee and I'm a business guy, we laugh about, but, what we care about in that committee most is using science and using research to inform decision making and to put the information out there for the people. And so I'm excited to be a part of NCIA in that capacity, and certainly glad that I've known you for all this time, Bethany.
It's a pleasure. Thanks again for joining me on the show today. Where can people find out more about Flow Technology and Lucid Labs?
You can find more about Flow Technology at flowtech.com, and that's FLOWE tech, like technology.com. My contact information's on there. Our general contact information's on there. Or you can catch me in person. I will be at NCIA's business conference in San Francisco in December.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Jim. I appreciate you joining me today. And thanks to our listeners for tuning in to another episode of NCIA's Cannabis Industry Voice. Until next time.
The opinions expressed on this CannabisRadio.com program are those of the guests and hosts and do not necessarily reflect those of the staff and management of CannabisRadio.com. Any rebroadcast, republication, or retransmission of this program without proper consent is prohibited.
Some coffee's fast, but not fresh. Some coffee's fresh, but only after a long wait. Speedway coffee is made fresh at the push of a button, hot or iced, so you can have fresh coffee your way, right away. Find a store near you at speedway.com/locations.
At Simple Mobile, you get the no contract advantage. Those other mobile companies make you think you're in control, but you're really not. Simple Mobile is different. You can get a powerful, nationwide 5G network all without a contract. It's the reliability you need when you need it, with no mystery fees, no activation fees, and no contract ever. Simple Mobile. Out with the old, in with the simple. 5G capable device and SIM required. Actual availability, coverage, and speed may vary. 5G network not available in all areas. 5G upload speeds not yet available.